Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this week's Fireside Chat with ATCA President and CEO Pete Dumont. I'm Abigail Glenn Chase, ATCA's Director of Programming and Communications. We're really excited about today's program, featuring our guest, Administrator Steve Dickson. Similar to Pete, aviation is in Administrator Dickson's blood. From his beginning as a United States Air Force officer and F-15 pilot to senior leadership at Delta, and now the head of the FAA. Administrator Dickson was confirmed for a 5-year term by the Senate on July 24th, 2019. So happy early anniversary, Administrator. What a year it's been. We are honored to have him here today. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, the Honorable Steve Dickson, and my President and CEO, Pete Dumont. Pete?
Hey, Abigail, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Nice intro. I'm not going to give you any more information on Administrator Dickson because if you don't know who he is, you're probably on the wrong chat. Steve, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy, especially during this time. I understand you have some opening remarks you'd like to give, so I'm going to get off here and mute for a minute, let you do your remarks. I'll be back on to chat with you after that.
All right. Thanks very much, Pete. And it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And thank you as well, Abigail. It's always nice to spend time with ATCA and with your members. I appreciate very much the contributions of ATCA. ATCA members are very much driving a lot of the innovation that's helping us at the agency maintain the safest, most efficient, and most dynamic aerospace system in the world. And I use the word aerospace very intentionally. But obviously, we're going through a difficult time in aviation right now. Our country's going through a difficult time. And COVID-19 obviously is a public health emergency, the likes of which we haven't seen in more than a century. And the FAA's top priority obviously is we have to get our mission done, but within the organization, it's to ensure both the safety of our workforce and, of course, the safety of the traveling public. And the two go very much hand in hand. When our people and their families are safe and healthy, they can concentrate on their safety duties. We've worked, I'm happy to say, very collaboratively and very openly and transparently with our labor partners to keep our employees safe and give them the information and resources that they need to be able to do their jobs. I'm very gratified at the level of collaboration and partnership that we have seen. It really has paid off working through these circumstances. We've made adjustments in staffing in our facilities to maximize social distancing and reduce the potential exposure to our people. And for those who could telework, and I think I was frankly skeptical about teleworking coming into this situation, but we've expanded those options to the maximum extent possible. And I think they've proven to be amazingly effective in this environment. We established a 3-tiered protocol in our facilities for air traffic, for cleaning our facilities, increasing general cleaning of commonly touched surfaces, conducting special cleanings following reports that we have a positive COVID-19 symptoms or tests. In technical operations, we temporarily limited our maintenance to only critical activities until we could achieve social distancing. But we continue to restore all air traffic equipment and maintain appropriate cybersecurity levels. In air traffic, we adjusted the number of people working on shifts, forming teams, and still meeting flight safety and demand needs in the system. The significant reductions in system traffic enabled us to do a lot of this on top of our existing contingency and resilience measures that we always have within the agency. We also divided, as I mentioned a minute ago, our shifts in our air traffic facilities into fixed teams so that if a member of one team became ill, it did not affect other teams throughout the facility. We adjusted some operating hours at facilities that had dropped to extremely low traffic levels during certain times. And we also created sterile backup operational areas in many of our facilities so that we could get back up and running quickly. And just tremendous creativity and innovation, among our team there. So we're taking a lot of steps to keep our employees healthy and safe while we continue to keep the system safe and running efficiently. Now, some of these steps, like facility cleaning, did require some level of service interruption at a number of facilities early on. Particularly, I remember the afternoon of March 17th at Midway Tower. And it took us a few days to work through that and a couple of other scenarios. But once we quickly developed a response protocol, we've had no significant additional impacts to our operations. We designed the National Airspace System to be resilient and flexible. So when service is disrupted, we're able to rely on well-established contingency plans whereby we can conduct operations from an alternate location, like a backup mobile tower, or hand the traffic off to adjacent facilities. And a day or two, just as an example, a day or two after the Midway Tower shut down with our first positive COVID-19 report, we had an earthquake in Salt Lake City that disabled the tower for a few days. And so we had to exercise our longstanding, recovery measures there in a non-COVID situation. We established an FAA industry contingency work group so that we could more effectively collaborate with the aviation community on our contingency measures. And of course, we continue to apply safety management system principles that include lessons learned reviews following every unplanned event to identify any safety concerns and revise and improve future contingency plans as needed. I'll give you an example. We applied SMS principles to coordinating with airports for overflow aircraft parking resulting from COVID-19 flight reductions. We currently have aircraft parked temporarily on 10 runways, and I'm monitoring this on a daily basis throughout the national airspace. The Air Traffic Organization provided our towers with a checklist to support safety assessments of overflow aircraft parking plans. This SMS process ensures that airport runways and movement areas remain safe for continued operations. This is just one example of many where we apply SMS to make sure that any operational changes that we make because of COVID-19 or any other reason in our daily operations will not have an adverse impact on system safety. So as part of our COVID-19 response, the FAA has made many adjustments to keep our employees safe and maintain a safe, efficient aerospace system. But I'm sure everyone would agree that we want to return to some semblance of normalcy, even though we can't say at this point exactly what the new normal will look like in every respect, certainly in the private sector and I think also in the government. We've established an agency-wide recovery roadmap team that's been underway for several weeks. It's developed a thoughtful plan so that we can begin returning to the physical workplace in the coming weeks and months. It's going to be a multi-phased plan, and we're going to do it safely, methodically, gradually, and of course, as you would expect out of the FAA, it'll be data-driven. Our plans will depend on the status of local and state safety orders and federal public health guidelines, and the data will drive our decision-making. But we're going to keep our workforce informed. As a matter of fact, I recorded a video this morning for our people as we move forward on this to provide additional information. So I don't want anyone to be surprised, and they can transition back to the workplace as easily as possible. The bottom line is that the FAA has been and will continue to be open for business, continuing to focus on mission accomplishment while making sure that we take the steps necessary to protect our people and their families. So, Pete, I'll turn it back over to you for some questions, but I just would say, to close, that even though we're facing some challenges right now, professionally, personally, and as a country, I'm also inspired by some of the great things that are happening, like the recent SpaceX launch that marked the first American-built spacecraft to carry people from American astronauts from American soil on an American rocket in nearly a decade. And the FAA was proud to play our role in the process. The next launch, the actual operational launch, will be an FAA licensed launch, right now scheduled for late August. I'm certainly inspired by the FAA's workforce and the aviation community that continues to show up to maintain the vibrant, safe aerospace system that we have today. The safety performance in the NAS is a result of our unity of purpose in aviation safety. And it's a strong reminder that when we work together, and listen to each other as a community, we can overcome difficult challenges and achieve great things. And as leaders, we have to be inclusive and cannot tolerate discrimination of any kind. We have to focus on our core values, such as mutual respect and servant leadership. And we have to listen to each other. That'll only make us stronger as a country, an agency, and an aviation community. So thank you, Pete. It's a privilege to be with you today. And over to you for some questions.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. I'd expect nothing less. I've worked with you for a long time, way back to Task Force 5 and everything in between. And it's been just about a year now that you've been the FAA administrator. And Abigail and I actually sat down with you when you first came on board. We talked a little bit about strategy. You just talked a lot about tactical day-to-day, how we're getting through this. Your strategic vision at the beginning of your term focused on 4 pillars, which have expanded to 5 pillars now, from what I understand, adding operational excellence. Do you see those as still your top priorities, and how do you work those into what's going on now? And I would assume when we talk about people, FAA culture, building, team building and change management, we're also adding diversity in there. And could you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. Great question. And yes, I think that, my thinking has evolved as I've gotten into the agency, but I think those principles that we talked about in my first month are still right at the fore. But when I got in the agency and had a chance to sit down with my team, really when you talk about something like stakeholder engagement, that really cuts across all of the pillars. So essentially, the way I look at it is we've got 5 strategic pillars that we want to be focused on, and stakeholder engagement, and a commitment in every area to continuous improvement. Those 2 themes run across these 5 pillars. The first one has got to be safety. It's got to be safety. We're an operator. We operate the air traffic system, but we're also a regulator and an innovator as well. So we've got to make sure that safety is always our North Star, because without that, we don't have anything. So, aviation safety, making sure that we're systematically collaborating both within the agency, knocking silos down, and collaborating with the industry, taking a look at everything from a holistic perspective is ultimately extremely important. Global leadership. I think that, certainly the FAA has done more than any other organization in the history of aviation to promote global aviation safety. We do that in several ways. We obviously work through ICAO, but we work bilaterally with many aviation authorities around the world, both on the air traffic side and on the aviation safety on the regulatory side. And we also work with regions of the world, certainly with, very important with Europe and with the more influential regulators around the world. So we will continue that approach. And the environment that we're in right now has changed for the time being, the way that we do some of these things, but it doesn't make these issues any less important. As a matter of fact, I think it actually creates some opportunities for us. The third point, I really focused on this, a lot in my remarks this morning, but it's the importance of our people. We're a very technical, data-driven, expert technical organization, but we're made up of 45,000 people and tens of thousands of our contractor partners as well. And so it's very important that I've always believed that you take care of your people and they take care of the mission. Operational excellence. This is about operationalizing NextGen, making sure that we're improving. We're looking at the performance of the system every day, continuing to move the needle on operational performance, and working to, obviously with the scheduled airlines, but with all stakeholders on that. And then the 5th area really is about innovation. It's one of the most exciting times in my life, probably the most exciting time in my life, and one of the most exciting times in aviation with new entrants. We're seeing some opportunities with UAS. We're working very hard on the remote ID rule. And we've done some good work during COVID-19 to enable some UAS applications that keeps getting bigger and better. And then, of course, commercial space activity, as I mentioned, is ramping up. And that's all going to be part of this national airspace ecosystem that we're so proud of.
Well, I'm sure this year looks a lot different than what you thought it was going to look like with, well, you expected the MAX, you knew that was going to have to be worked on, but a plague, earthquakes, those types. I've been in a tower during an earthquake before. That's not a lot of fun. I'm going to jump into a question that we've been doing a lot of these fireside chats with Paul Rinaldi, Terry Bristol, Nick Callio, and everybody asks about the Aviation Trust Fund. It's on everyone's mind. It's the first question that came up on the Q&As already before you even started speaking. So a lot of people want to hear about that. And we've at ATCA have been listening as well. The Honorable Donna McLean, who sits on the MAC with you, wrote an article for our bulletin that will be coming out on Monday that explains a little bit about the trust fund, how it funds the FAA, what some of the alternatives might be. What do you see moving forward with a depletion of the trust fund and the tax holiday?
Well, it's a great question, Pete, and it's something that we're obviously very focused on. We're working very closely with the Department of Transportation and having conversations with Congress on this point right now. And I remember I testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on I think it was actually March 11th, and at that point in time, our projections on out into the future were that we could be self-sustaining off the trust fund as far as the eye could see, even in a recessionary scenario. And so it was an extremely healthy trust fund at that particular point in time. And boy, how quickly things changed. And frankly, the tax holiday is a factor, but really incrementally with the precipitous decline in demand, about 97 to 98% of the trust fund revenue comes off of airline ticket taxes anyway, and other scheduled carrier taxes. So the tax holiday doesn't really add a whole lot of, it doesn't dig that hole a whole lot deeper, if you will. So we knew we were going to have a problem even with just the drop in demand. So we had developed got a very proactive finance team, and within days they had developed several modeling scenarios about what the trajectory of the trust fund would be, and we began having internal conversations within days about various actions that we might need to take. So there are several alternatives, I think, that have been discussed. After the Great Recession in the late 2000s, there was a period of time where general fund revenue was used to fund FAA operations accounts. And so, we will take a look at scenarios like that, but there hasn't been a particular legislative solution, but I know it's very top of mind for both sides of the aisle and both houses of Congress, and we're in very detailed conversations about that. And I'm confident that we will come up with a good solution.
Well, yeah, that was my next question, whether you've been in talks with the legislators about changing the law so that makes that possible. That's good to hear, because I know obviously you must be concerned about the FAA budget moving forward, some of the NextGen programs, some of the modernization and safety programs that need to be funded, and getting your contractors back on board, getting industry back on board. What do you think that recovery looks like? I mean, nobody can predict the future, of course.
What do I think the commercial aviation recovery looks like?
Yes.
I have my own thoughts, and I'm obviously in conversations with the airline CEOs and other stakeholders. It's interesting. I watch the traffic numbers every day, and we were down. The scheduled carriers, the TSA passenger counts had been down above 95% in the depths of the trough.
Right.
The lowest that we saw scheduled carrier operations down was probably in the 75-ish% range. Actually, more in the Northeast and in New York in particular, with the I think even greater decline in business travel. Frankly, with the economy being shut down essentially for a while. So I think that we're certainly seeing some volume come back at very depressed fare levels. My personal feeling is we're going to see leisure travel probably come back first, and then we'll see business travel will be a little slower to recover. I think that businesses are learning about new ways to interact, and I think corporate travel budgets will be scrutinized closely here over the next period of time. And then, of course, international travel, as the virus progresses and you have various situations around the world, and international travel will probably lag somewhat as well. So it'll be. I think everyone seems to be saying, we're looking at something that's going to take some period of time, to recover. I think we're talking about years rather than months for a full recovery.
Right. Yeah. Very uncertain times to see what it's. Are you flying at all now?
I have flown, yes, much more limited,
Yeah.
but yes, I have flown within the last couple of weeks, and it is the airports are very empty. There is traffic, as you've probably been reading, has been picking up a little bit, and we have seen a little pickup in system volume, particularly with general aviation. General aviation is about flat over a rolling 3-year average. And as a matter of fact, some of the flight schools are almost back up at full operation. So we've had to make sure that our air traffic facilities are able to support those operations. But the scheduled carriers are still a ways from being back. You can see that with their fleet plans out there. You can only guess what the actual capacity reductions will be, but they will certainly be planning for. We're talking with them all the time on what their fleet plans are and what their network plans are to make sure that we can support their operations if they redo their schedules in our air traffic facilities.
Okay. We've got a couple questions on our Q&A about the 737 MAX and getting it recertified by the end of June, like it's being reported lately in the news. Do you see that slipping at all?
Well, there was, I think the report was about, well, first of all, I appreciate the question. We shouldn't be talking about any timelines with the MAX. And, we continue to work very effectively, even in this COVID environment, with Boeing, working through narrowing the issues and working with the regulators and the validating authorities around the world. So we continue to work through all of the issues. The next big milestone is a certification flight. We don't have everything accomplished yet to be able to do that. And I think that's what had been reported in the last day or two, that there was some conjecture about when that may be, but it remains to be seen exactly what date that will occur. But we're certainly, we certainly have that as the next point, in the process.
You made a very good point. We shouldn't be talking about timelines because that's not really what it's about, is it? It's about when it's ready, and yeah, do it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit. You had a MAC yesterday, right? Management Advisory Council meeting.
Yes.
Anything about that you'd like to tell the audience here, or?
I am obviously the work of the MAC. The MAC's a very important body to me to make sure that I'm getting feedback from experienced industry veterans from multiple standpoints, in terms of some who have worked inside the agency, some who have worked in large stakeholder organizations or elsewhere in the government. And so there are some strategic things that I really want to get their perspective and advice on. Excuse me. One subject that we've been talking about quite a bit in the agency is an enterprise view of data, whether it's safety data or operational data or even human resources, people data. And how do we integrate those from an enterprise perspective effectively as we move forward? That's one of the really important things that I'm talking to the MAC about, and got some good counsel from them yesterday. Also about the things that they're doing within their organizations to deal with the pandemic, and things that we can do as an agency to make sure that we continue to be effective in accomplishing our mission going forward.
Have you seen this this slowdown in aviation as an opportunity to get some things done that needed to be done, NextGen wise, modernization wise? You know, I said this on most of my firesides. I saw this meme. It says, "Hey, while we're all stuck inside, why don't you fix the roads?" So, you know, with that mindset, I'm wondering, without all the flying, are we taking an opportunity to move things forward? And that's probably going to go into a question that I'd like to ask you about the innovation office and those types of things, that whether it's been slowed down.
Sure, it's a great question. And I mentioned earlier that I was skeptical coming into this telework environment. I'm not a FaceTime kind of leader. I don't expect people to, you know, it's not, if I don't see it, it doesn't mean that you're not working hard. But certainly being able to collaborate in person, you know, as we've been able to do at ATCA and other, you know, other things. You mentioned Task Force 5 earlier. You know, being able to get people around the table is extremely important. And I set a goal when I came in the agency of getting out to all of our facilities, all of our regions within the first year. I made it out to 2 of our 9 regions in the first few months. So I was 2 for 9 when all of this started. But my team put together a series of actually 11 town halls for all of our regions and our international team. And I was able to touch more than 10,000 FAA people in a little more than a week. And so that just shows you the kinds of opportunities that are available. So with respect to NextGen, several things. We have gotten some, I think, good industry recommendations on the minimum equipment list, which is the industry side of the commitment on the levels of equipage, kind of the tipping point on getting us to a point where we have a more homogeneous fleet and more consistency in capabilities, which decreases the complexity for our controllers as we integrate NextGen technologies together. And we're working with the NAC and with other stakeholders on where the opportunities are to move forward on trajectory-based operations. Also, I think a success story is we have worked really hard to engage communities on noise. And, you know, this has been something that has been a challenge for the industry and the agency, is how do you modernize the system and make it more efficient, but also address community concerns about noise. And we just had a very effective and what seems to be widely praised engagement with the South Florida Metroplex project, and it was actually a Zoom conference, and it was you know, streamed. We had you know, as I understand it, tens of thousands of interested participants. And I think it's a way that we can be more transparent and actually engage the communities much more effectively and manage that modernization both in parts of the country where we're modernizing the airspace, but also able to take into account local airspace and community considerations.
Okay. We have a question from TJ Schultz from the Airport Consultants Council, and he wants to know his member companies, as well as some of my member companies, design and build air traffic control towers and facilities. Do you have any thoughts on how the future facilities will change as it relates to design and layout? Do you think this will have any effect on it, or do you think the plans that you had in place prior to this are still the plans moving forward? Has it changed your strategic plan? And I'd kind of wonder about remote towers.
Sure. Well, remote towers, you know, as you know, we're testing. We have a couple of test beds out there, and we will continue those efforts. But I think even in places where we have physical towers, are there are there opportunities to take advantage of technologies and maybe integrate the two together? So I think we need to keep that dialogue open and make sure that we are able to again take advantage of new technologies, as they become available, and keep our minds open. I want the agency to be more agile and able to innovate more quickly, and partner with the private sector and move good ideas forward. The trick is getting the safety analysis done, managing the change to the operation, because there's a certain tension sometimes between a safe, stable system and a system that's accommodating a lot of change. We've got to be able to do both at the same time, and I think we're able to do that, but we've just got to be very careful, particularly as we're scaling these kinds of changes into our larger and more complex airports around the country.
Crises oftentimes create opportunities. You mentioned opportunities. They also change the way we look at things. Things that were on the back burner before might be on the front burner now. When I was speaking with Nick Callio, he was talking about airports transitioning very quickly now to touchless, ticketing touchless, check-in, screening, those types of things, which before were nice to have things and now seem to be a necessity moving forward. I see some of those things in our industry as well, our side of it. You mentioned March 11th. That was when we were supposed to have World ATM Congress, but we had to, wasn't that the day you went into quarantine as well?
No, but that was the day the handshake scene around the world. So it was about a week later, and then I had to spend an additional 7 days. And then later on in the month was after I had a chance to go out and visit Potomac TRACON and see the measures that they had taken out there, out to the command center. Then things kind of went on more of a full telework posture within the agency, to the extent that we were able to do that outside of our daily air traffic operations, of course.
Well, things change very quickly in that 1 week to 10-day period between
Absolutely.
right around March 11th forward. Things were
Right.
rapid. Can you provide an update on transitioning to satellite-based ADSB? The question specifically says Alaska has the largest areas without ground-based coverage.
Sure. So space-based ADSB is something that we are very interested in, and we are engaged currently with doing some testing in the Caribbean for air traffic purposes. But I actually believe that when you look at safety data, that there's an opportunity for us to use that surveillance data for other purposes beyond it, and potentially fill in some surveillance gaps. Alaska is a good example, and of course, out over the oceans is a good example. But also to be able to have trajectory and surveillance data to understand around the world, where some of the pressure points are that we need to address from an aviation safety perspective. There are governance issues associated with the use of that data that we need to work through, and we need to work through that with the industry. But I think it's an exciting technology, and it's something that the FAA needs to be out there and leveraging and take advantage of, and we're going to do that.
Okay. I know CANSO has been working with Ariane during this time period to use the space-based ADSB data to show trend lines, show how the traffic has decreased or increasing, and producing analysis based on that. So they're using it a little bit over there. You spoke about space launches. It was a great thing to watch. Very exciting. You're right. American soil, American rocket, a partnership with industry, just all the right things that we should be looking for. A very feel-good thing in a bad time. There are going to be more space launches, obviously, and the ramp up that we heard before all of this started was maybe a couple of months. How are you going to integrate the launches with the commercial aviation, the general aviation. I heard SDI before, SIC now, I think. What's the mechanism?
So it's the space data integrator is what you're talking about, which we have currently a space control room, if you will, set aside in the command center to take the telemetry data off of each launch. And we're in the process of continuing to develop that system so that we can be more surgical and use the live telemetry off the launch. And if it's a recoverable booster, obviously, as we see in the case of SpaceX, be able to use that to more surgically manage, launch and reentry operations. And so we will continue to do that. We're already within air traffic making some progress with time-based decision making and being a little more surgical around how we manage airspace closures, particularly up and down the East Coast. And we're continuing to refine that capability. We will continue to do that going forward.
So when you say more surgical, are you talking about smaller restricted areas to non-participating and smaller launch windows?
I think that as we continue to work with, with the operators, we could see it sort of depends on the nature of the operation that you're talking about. But obviously, yes, in terms of smaller restrictions and more dynamic, allowing flight plans to be filed even when the airspace may be currently closed, planning for it, with more certainty that it will be open by the time that flight gets there. Those types of things where we can be more surgical, both in terms of time and also in the amount of airspace that we're using.
Okay. And is this leading to performance-based regulations, not just space launches, but low-level unmanned aircraft, UAM, high-level balloons? All of that is progressing very rapidly. Is the FAA keeping up with performance-based regulations, do you think? I know it's...
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And it's frankly one reason why, we can't just think about NextGen and about modernizing the existing aerospace. We need to think about, and that's why I use the term aerospace. We have this dynamic system that we have that's more dynamic with the amount of general aviation, business aviation, commercial carriers, military, the diversity of operations that we have in the United States that nowhere else in the world sees this kind of activity. Now you add UAS at scale, and you add space launches at scale. I've currently 12 licensed spaceports in the country. We need to be thinking about this differently, and those types of operations were not contemplated, a few years ago, at least to the kind of scale that we know we'll be seeing in the next few years. So my organization is looking at, what is this airspace ecosystem look like, and are there ways that we can, and again, it gets back to the data thing, when you look at the data that can stream off of UAS platforms, and how can we leverage that? And are there things that we can even learn about traditional air traffic control that will allow all of this to come together effectively over time? So again, it is a really exciting time, and we need to be incorporating those capabilities. Our strategy has been, and it will continue to be, that we want to integrate operations. We don't want to segregate different types of operations within the airspace, but we need to be very cognizant of, as we share these new capabilities, that we don't compromise safety as we do that.
Of course, right. Safety has to be number one always. It's very difficult because the airspace wasn't designed for these types of vehicles.
Right.
The airspace was designed for a specific pilot in an airplane environment, and that's rapidly changing. So personally, I think if we had our way, we'd just start all over. But you can't do that. You can't change the wing while the plane's flying.
Right. Well, and that's, that's why remote identification is so important for UAS, because,
Exactly.
there is a pilot, there is a,
Uh-huh.
drones have a pilot. It's just that the pilot's not in the vehicle. So, we need to be able to bring these different parts of the system together. And that's what we're really focused on.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about back to structure and the FAA, the Office of Innovation, as it was outlined in the reauthorization? And, there's been chatter about NextGen and ATO reorganization. Can you tell us anything about that?
Sure. And I kind of alluded to this before. We need to be able to innovate and be more agile and find ways to scale off-the-shelf technologies, but integrate them into our existing systems. And as you know, the agency has a very robust research and development arm, and that will continue to be very important. But we need to combine it with a competency and a capability to be able to innovate. So that's really what what the Innovation Office is all about, is how do we do both of those, and how do we take good ideas. We don't want to have a not invented here mentality. We want to be proactive. And so how do we take good ideas and figure out how to ingest them and scale them safely into our system so that we can continue to raise the performance bar. I've seen this in the airline industry. We can't have an idea that, hey, we've always done it this way, so we need to keep doing it the same way. We need to think about, this is another reason why I'm very focused on data. Databases and systems were often created over the years to solve specific problems. And what I have seen, again, in the private sector and within the agency, is that when you take an enterprise view, sometimes there are parts of the organization that are trying to optimize their own operations to achieve their own goals. And we may need to have we don't have visibility into what those trade-offs need to be. And so that's going to be a big focus, is figuring out as an agency how we can do that more effectively. And I think that we will unlock a lot of ability to be able to be more proactive in our safety programs. We already do a great job. And I just think there's a lot more that can be done with machine learning and artificial intelligence, but we've got to have the data integrated together across our various disciplines to be able to move forward. So that's going to be a big part of our innovation focus.
AI and machine learning, that could be a whole nother hour. At the ATCA annual, I looked at, I learned things there too. I looked at the SWIM, with the next phase of SWIM, where they're taking all the data that they've been collecting and putting it into something that's usable. I'll call it a dashboard, for lack of a better term. So I have seen the FAA moving toward collecting and understanding data to make critical decisions moving forward.
Well, and Pete, I would say, again, even with, and that's great, but even with that, have we thought about how that same data can be repurposed or portions of it used for another purpose within the agency that would be beneficial, rather than solving another problem over here. And that's what I've seen in the private sector, is if you can really identify all the interfaces and bring that data together, it really can make the organization a lot more agile and flexible and innovative.
Oh, and part of that is breaking down the stovepipes, like you talked about at the beginning.
They go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand, exactly. You can't do one without doing the other. So a shameless plug. ATCA is working on a Blue Skies initiative, which basically explores what's required on every front of air traffic management for the future, whether it's equipment, airspace, procedures, procurement, workforce, aircraft, airports, you name it. I know the FAA is thinking about looking forward and future looking forward, and I'm actually going to have a conversation with Pam Whitley about this in the next week or so to give her a brief up. I think you know about that, to give her a brief up on what we're thinking, what we're discussing, and what we're producing. So obviously your agency is working with ATCA as an association. How are you interacting with other associations to get that stakeholder engagement?
Well, obviously on the airspace issues, as you mentioned, a lot of work going on internally, looking out to the issues that I talked about with what we're seeing with new entrants, but also, how do we develop a smarter and more agile system going on out towards 2030, 2035, and how do we take advantage of all those new technologies? In terms of stakeholder engagement, certainly continuing work with the NAC and with the Drone Advisory Committee, as well as the Commercial Space Advisory Committee, the ComStack as well. And I ultimately see eventually us trying to bring those various domains together. We all need to be speaking the same language. We're all sharing the same airspace ultimately, and so we need to be able to figure out what that looks like going forward. That's not something that's going to happen right away, but we need to be thinking about the airspace in a truly integrated way. And so we'll continue to work, through the associations, with labor, commercial aviation, general aviation. We had a great commercial aviation safety town hall recently, and we're getting ready to have a general aviation safety town hall, I believe, next Thursday. Right. And we'll continue to interact in this type of environment. And I think, even once we get to the new normal, whatever that looks like, I do think that the ability to be able to do a combination of virtual and in-person meetings may allow us to actually interact more frequently and possibly even keep greater momentum towards achieving the goals that we all want to achieve together.
Okay. You mentioned the NAC. I sit on the NAC. That's the NextGen Advisory Committee for anyone on here that doesn't know that. Do you see, as a result of this, okay, so we had our priorities on the NAC. We had the things we were looking at. We had direction from the agency on this is what we'd like you to look at. Do you see that changing now? I mean, it's got to change, right?
Well, I think it'll evolve. I think we've got to follow through with the commitments that we have had on both the agency side and on the agency side and on the industry side. And as you said earlier, this environment with lower traffic levels has created certain opportunities that we want to be able to take advantage of. What we really are focused on is a lot of the technology, the building blocks already exist. Now it's the question of how do we integrate them effectively, and how do we manage that change, both on the industry side and within the agency side, to scale those changes out within the operation. And so that's really my focus, is the operationalization of NextGen here in the next few years, so that we achieve the initial vision. Already made a lot of progress, but again, getting it in the daily operation a lot of times is the most difficult part, because that changes the way we think about certain things. And there's a lot of change management for pilots, controllers, the air traffic managers, in how we do things and how we make decisions on an integrated way. And we need to keep focused on that.
Right. If I go to one of your pillars is workforce. So talking about the workforce for a moment, at most of your FAA facilities, because of the way the new structure is and the way people work to keep them all safe, the different schedules and the timing, most of the training for developmentals or trainees isn't there right now, and that's understandable. When they come back, they're going to need to get back up to speed, of course. What about the FAA Academy, the feeder into the new workforce? When do you expect, that's one of our questions from the audience, when do you expect to be sending students back? Again, I'm not trying to ask you to predict the future.
Well, obviously, you know, as I said at the beginning, we're going to be data driven as we open facilities back up. We can't have safety risk accrue within the system. And so what that means in terms of our training footprint is that you know, the more of a pause, you know, we sort of put a moratorium out there for good reason, but we're going to have to start starting up that pipeline again so that we're able to support continued safe operations as the pace begins to ramp back up, and also have more folks out there, because that'll just make our workforce more resilient
Right.
as we move forward. So we will be, you know, when the academy is ready from a facilities perspective. I've actually, in the last few days, we have reviewed their plans for a combination of virtual training and in-person training, and it'll look a little bit different in terms of class sizes and how people are deployed. And we're talking about things like longer cords on microphones and things on headsets and things like that, so that we can have social distancing to the maximum extent that we can in that type of environment. So we will, you know, we'll continue to do things like that, but we are going to have to get that process started again here in the coming weeks. So, you know, I'm not able to make a specific announcement yet, but it'll be, you know, in the next little while here, if the public health trends, you know, continue the way that it looks like they will. We'll have to see.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our thing here, so I'm going to close out with a question that someone asked right away, but I thought I'd save it to the end because it's a good closing question. What's the one topic or issue that gives you the most excitement and enthusiasm for the aviation sector in the year ahead? What are you most looking forward to optimistically?
Well, I'm looking forward to, well, first of all, I'm looking forward to some sense of normalcy. But I think what really gets me excited are these opportunities for us all together to do some great things, and that just encompasses, again, collaboration, working together, getting really excited about bringing young people into our workforce. There's just so much opportunity. And despite the challenges that we're going through right now, there's so many great things about aviation and aerospace, great careers. Yes, we're going through a difficult time right now, but this SpaceX launch, you know, so inspirational. And, you know, I just think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work together on the next generation of aerospace leaders, but also even for those within our agency to make sure that they are satisfied and broadened and developed in their careers, so that they will be able to take over and lead us into this exciting future. There's a lot of stuff happening right now, but I just think the opportunities are limitless for all of us, and that's what really you know, gets me excited is being a part of that.
I would agree with you, definitely. And there's a lot of talent out there. We do the YAPs, the Young Aviation Professionals, and I'm always amazed when I speak to them about the talent, the enthusiasm that's out there.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for your time. I want to keep us on time here and respect everyone. I know you're very busy. I'm so happy that as soon as we asked, you said, yeah, I'd love to do it. I want to talk to people. We appreciate that. We appreciate the work you do with ATCA and the support you give us, and we'll continue to support you as well.
Thank you, Pete. It's a pleasure, and thank you for your hospitality, virtual as it was. And I look forward to hopefully seeing everyone in person sooner rather than later. And it's a privilege to serve.
Hey, I know just the place.
Okay, good.
ATCA. Okay, Abigail?
So thank you again, Administrator Dickson and Pete. We will see you again soon.